Good evening, and welcome to Doctorpiece Theater. My name is Dr. Dennis Business, and tonight we will continue our dive into the last of the unholy trinity, Reaper's Creek. When we last left our hero, he was returning from fucking space. Chapter 15, God of Black. The aliens haven't bothered me for years. Maybe they didn't send out a distress signal. Maybe they're afraid of me. I've been keeping myself busy with my abilities. I've learned to levitate on command. I've learned to cook food with my thoughts. I can make water funnel upwards and fall just by thinking about it. I can even repair injuries. Whatever is in my head, it can change the world around it in an instant. Maybe it was growing over time. Maybe the older I get, the more the aliens fear me, which is why they tried to get me so young. I imagine I've been left alone all this time simply because I wanted to be. A lot of people have been doing whatever I want them to. Julia is 18 now, and we've gone all the way many times. I never told her to do anything, but this summer just passed. The moment I desired her, she made herself available to me. She calls me when I miss her. She doesn't when I'm distracted. No one argues with me anymore. No one questions me. My test scores in class are always passing, even when I pay absolutely no attention. In September, a sunny day out. It's September, a sunny day out. Being 14, I had just started high school. David was coincidentally in all the same classes as me. Coincidence. I had grown fond of him being around. We had a lot of long talks. He let me know all the reasons he ever did anything to distance himself from me. We even hugged. Throughout all the orientations today, whenever I found myself getting bored, things would suddenly turn into a typical name game. Some teachers even resorted to letting us roam the halls early to get a better feel for the school on our own. This was all as I expected. Exactly what I wanted. In the last class of the day, PE, the instructor was talking about essentials of safety. A male student with long black hair, to my right, raised his hand and asked the teacher, "But what if we want to hurt someone?" The teacher looked back at the student and said, "Why would you want to hurt anyone?" The boy looked at me and I saw right through him. I saw his alien form. It took years, but they finally decided to pursue me again. He didn't get a chance to reply to the teacher's question. I knew what he was going to say. He was going to try to imply that I was a danger to the other students. He was going to try and out me. Everyone gathered around him as he gasped for breath and fell over. The moment he looked in my eyes was like time froze. My heart was beating so quickly, my focus was so precise, I felt like my eyes could cut the air in half. That was when I decided he should die. Moments before, I severed his ability to breathe. Excuse me. That was when I decided he should die. Moments before, I severed his ability to breath. Reality glowed around me. The lights, the skin of all the students, the teacher's bald head. It was like I could see everything I needed, and it all shined. In the moment, my existence demanded it. I knew everything I needed to know. I didn't need to hide anymore. I realized nothing could hurt me. That alien underestimated me, and when I was done deciding his fate, when I was done soaking in the reality of my situation and numerous other factors saturating the air, like whispers in my ear, all had spoken their piece at once. I surmise no one has ever known whoever or whatever I am. "I'm calling an ambulance!" screamed the PE teacher as the alien's head smacked the ground repeatedly as it convulsed on the floor. His skull, cracking open from his violent thrashing, echoed through my head. When I realized the aliens had found me, my brain instinctively sent a vibration outwards, so I could sense where this creature had come from. His trail left a stench I could only sense in my mind. Thousands of miles away, a ship idled. This one was different than the last, thinking of the one that came before. Over time, I grew a subtle remorse for that. For what I did. God damn it. Thousands of miles away, a ship idled. This one was different than the last, thinking of the one that came before. Over time, I grew a subtle remorse for what I did to the creatures on that initial ship. It was somewhat nice to know that I wouldn't be killing the innocent bystanders and families of those who came to harm me this time around. I laid down as the screams began. The alien's skin was melting away, and everyone who gathered around him began to see that boy for who he really was. I'm sure for a while they would notice I was now passed out, but I planned to be back before anyone showed any concern. Flight out of your body is incredibly smooth. You can see the clouds blowing through the air, but you don't feel a thing. There's no weight, no friction, or any other form of resistance. The speed I traveled was selective. I was taking my time getting to the ship because I hadn't traveled into space since the last time they visited me. Hurrying would imply I was worried, but I knew I had plenty of time. The moment I passed through the walls, a field activated around the entire ship. I didn't think they knew I would find out what was going on so quickly. They thought I was now trapped, but I wasn't going to bother proving them wrong yet. My curiosity consumed me. The aliens on board looked rough. Some had significant scars. Others were old and crippled. Passing through multiple rooms on the ship, I could hear their minds and vocal cords screaming. There was a kitchen, a control station, bathrooms, bedrooms, everything you would expect on a space station made by humans, only in black and not quite presented in the same styles or proportions. It was beyond obvious these creatures were not here by their own choice. My original assumption was that they were simply afraid as they had heard stories about me. But seeing their bodies, they appeared as prisoners. This species must be the one to exile anyone who is imperfect. It was odd, though. I had seen these aliens repair exploded eyes before. I had seen them heal as if it was nothing before. So why were all these rooms filled with broken creatures? Unless there was a monetary system in their society, and healing came at a price. Fuck you, Greg. I felt bad for them. They were terrified of me, and had no will to harm me. As I arrived in the control center of the ship, I could see the pilots were not piloting anything at all. It was all as if this was set up elsewhere. One of the creatures, who was not horrified by my presence, approached me and tried to communicate with me in their alien language. I could feel what it felt. It was afraid of the second ship, a ship that hid behind a cloak that those on board had no idea I could detect and see right through. I felt sympathy for this creature speaking to me. He reminded me of the special ed boy who drugged me in the bathroom so he could remove the devices of the other aliens planted in my brain to attempt stunting my abilities. The invisible ship fired a beam towards the prisoner ship that prevented the force field. that penetrated the force field. Everyone exploded around me. My arms, my legs, my upper body. I didn't even notice it was all gone in an instant. I felt myself floating through space, past the field the elite aliens had generated around the now decimated prisoner ship. They shot at me once more, and I felt nothing. They fired again, and I continued to advance, regardless. These creatures were not stupid. They knew they were all about to die. It took them only seconds before they attempted to evade me, before they had even began to turn. The entire ship was crushed in front of my reforming eyes. As my brain grew around the black rock, the source of who I am, and my body was restored to its full form, I felt a sense of immortality. The world was mine. Maybe one day the universe. But I had been up here too long. Time to return to class. Chapter 16. Goodbye, Washington. I was sitting in the nurse's office. I was visited by other students. Some I barely knew. Lost in thought over what had happened before the comprehension of most of the people who were visiting me, I had an epiphany. The power I have inside me, it has turned my entire world into whatever I desire. I am human. Despite the rock in my head, all I am is another person. I have selfish thoughts. I'm designed to forward my own species. I'm programmed to do whatever it takes to survive. And now, I'm manipulating the world around me to make everyone love me. But that's wrong. There's war, and then there's normal life. In war, you do whatever you can to continue your existence. But this perversion of reality itself, I don't want it anymore. David was smiling across the room from me. Two pretty teachers with cleavage showing stood waiting for me to address them at the entrance of the room. I looked at all of them, and I smiled. Something is about to change, I said. The teacher with larger breasts than most anyone I've seen replied, What do you mean, cutie? And click, just like that, their smiles faded. Both teachers were overcome with an expression of confusion and immediately left the room. David stood up, looked me in the eyes, lifted his finger, and said, I don't know what's going on, but I haven't liked you since elementary school. Stay away from me. He then proceeded to leaving the room. This felt better. This felt like real life. Walking out of the nurse's office, most students had already left. The buses were gone, but my mom was just pulling up outside in her car. She hadn't smiled very much since she left Papa. He drank alcohol a lot. She didn't like his use of illegal drugs either. At one point, he grabbed her and threw her against the wall, screamed at her. She finally decided to leave him, saying it was to protect us. But from what I recall, he was always nice to us. My sisters handled the divorce relatively well. My eldest seemed to care the least. We would all have relationship problems in our future. Maybe it was a result of our mother leading by example. Maybe because of our genetics. Or maybe because this is just the way humans are. Maybe it's because your fucking whole family's a piece of shit. My mother didn't talk to me much on the drive home. Something had changed in her, like it did everyone else. I was curious, so I chose to dive into her mind, silently sitting beside her. There was a negative circular narrative running through her head. She couldn't get over her eyes exploding all those years ago. Reasonably so. She was thinking about me, how I was the one at fault, and she seemed to want nothing to do with me despite the fact I was her own flesh and blood. I don't dive into her mind further than her surface thoughts. I would go back to everyone liking me, to everyone smiling when I entered the room. But that is a fiction. It is a tanning bed instead of a beach. When I got home, it was more of the same. I was a freak to my family. I was only seeing it now, as I had been in denial before. And because of the mutated black core in my brain, the world denied it with me. I was to call Julia tonight. She was expecting me. Incredibly worried, my hand shook as I lifted the phone. On the other end, Julia answered almost instantly. "Hi, Daniel!" She happily yelped into the phone. "Hi, Julia," I replied. "I miss you so much. I've been thinking about you all day," she said genuinely. I was so happy to hear someone still liked me. But maybe she only liked me because she didn't know about who I was. Without hesitation, I sent a wave of thoughts her way. They filled her mind, and she fell into a complete silence. The abductions, the dead animals, the creatures I killed, my mother's eyes, she saw it all. I made sure of that. "Julia?" I asked. Julia spoke softly. I just had so many." I interrupted her. "It's me, Julia. I can do anything I want. And I wanted you to know who I am." Julia went silent on the other line. After another moment, she asked, "You controlled all those people?" I answered, "Yes, I did. I've hurt people. I've seen and done things beyond this world." Now it was her turn to interrupt me. "Did you control me? Am I the same?" After a brief pause, I said, "I don't know. I'm glad you still like me, though." Julia spoke up quickly again. "Come see me." Setting down the phone, I walked over to my family sitting in the front room watching TV. We were living in a condo with 2 bedrooms thanks to the divorce. "I'm gonna leave for a while," I said. A tear fell down my mom's face, clearly still swamped with the thoughts of before. She said, "You can't just leave when you want. You're 14. My middle sister added, "Maybe he should leave." Seconds later, the sliding door closed behind me. I kissed my dog goodbye, and just as I did, only without my body, I flew into the air towards Ohio, where Julia was waiting. What? The trip to her took about as long as I wanted it to, which was about 15 minutes. I landed outside her window on her porch, trying to position myself to a good lighting and pose she might think is cool. I spoke to her mind. "Julia, look outside." Julia walked up to her window in a towel as she had just gotten out of the shower. Her facial expression was priceless. She was even more amazed when a human-sized hole formed in her wall seemingly on its own. Walking towards her, I grabbed her and kissed her. I was so much taller than her. It was perfect. She went to kiss me back, wrapping her arms around me, which caused her towel to fall off. I lifted her up, leaving the perfect hole in her wall behind me. I laid her on her bed. The next hour of my life was spent doing everything I wanted to do. And I knew what she wanted mirrored my own desires perfectly. A bullet passed through my neck and into her forehead. Wait. The sex doll's name is Julia. Oh. Chapter 17. Playing God. She was dead. I stared at her as the life left her eyes. I didn't see a red glow. I saw a diverse explosion of light before me. Her essence, her energy, leaving her body. Julia had been shot through the neck, bled out, and all I did was stare. The man who shot her, he was wearing a funny costume. He must have thought very highly of himself. I should have known he was behind me. I should have known he was peering through the skylight above us, carefully aiming his weapon to do what he no doubt thought would kill me. I knew why he was here. I could read everything about the situation I found myself in, to the smallest detail. He was hired by a person who was hired by another person who was sent to employ an assassin such as him. Those creatures that took me on their ship, the ones that tested on me, tried to defeat my black stone. They really thought that if they sent someone after me who wasn't like them, I wouldn't retaliate. Time for punishment. The assassin was pinned against the wall, blood leaking from his ears to match his polka dot suit, red and black. Ridiculous. Julia's soul moved in the slowest of motion, almost as if she was sticking around to look into her eyes, to see her own dead body, just like you hear in all those stories. We love looking at ourselves as we leave, almost like one final goodbye. There were creatures all over Earth, just like the ones who took me. These ones hid in human skin. It was time for there to be none. My body collapsed as I was ejected out of it. Time froze again. I imagined a beam of energy coming out the back of my neck, my spine, my tailbone, and feet. I forward thrusted through the wall, shooting across highways, through wooded areas, and across the ocean. I traveled to every green light I could see and feel for thousands of miles. The green light I programmed or otherwise designated in my mind to signify the visitors. All I would have to do is get close enough to see their face for them to die. I could have simply imagined them perish from across the planet, but I wanted to see. I wanted to be close. I wanted to experience their death with my own presence. They were creatures in the bodies of children. Their adopted mothers screamed at the loss of them. Some of them had fathers who cried. Some of them had no fathers at all. Other creatures were businessmen. In fact, most of them were. I pulled some of them out of buildings. I drowned some in their own bathtubs. The rest I simply separated head from body. If it occurred in real time, their deaths took me 17 hours and 47 minutes to accomplish. However, this was in the other realm of existence. Thus, I was back before the assassin could let out his second scream of pain from my intentional tightening of pressure around his entire body. I wanted my body upright by the time I got back, and there I was, standing lifeless next to Julia in our blood-soaked bed, waiting for my soul to return. As I phased through the wall, I walked into my body and lurched towards the man on the wall, holding his throat, feeling his pulse blink down my arm. I spoke to him. "I want you to see how pointless what you have done is." He looked at me with a smile in his eyes, showing his teeth and a half grin on his face as blood seeped out of his mouth. He gurgled, "I don't fear you." I replied, "Julia?" The man looked at me, trying to hold back his confusion, masking it with false confidence. Julia sat up in bed. The light her soul filled the room with was gone. Without much thought, I had returned her to this world and given her all the information she needed to know. Julia blinked a few times and looked at me holding the man against the wall with blurry eyes. "You're naked," she said. I replied, and it's not just your blood I'm drenched in, darling." "What is this?" the assassin screamed. I replied, "I just wanted you to see that you accomplished nothing, and your employers are dead." A look of desperation crossed his eyes as the walls melted behind him. I didn't want to kill him, to be brutally honest. I only want to kill what I fear. The creatures from another world, they had the means to kill me. I knew I would have to commit further genocide against them to truly protect myself. But this human? All humans? There was nothing for them to do but kneel. As the man passed through the walls, soaring hundreds of miles from me at thousands of miles per hour, I made sure he stayed alive, and that he landed in a swamp near nothing familiar to him. I spared this man, but left him broken. If he lived at this point, that would be up to him. As the walls reformed, as the blood evaporated into nothing, as the floor cleaned itself and the furniture was reassembled, as the bullet hole in the glass above us closed, as the sheets on the bed made themselves, Julia spoke to me. "What can you not do?" I replied quickly. "Lose you." She laughed. "Smooth, Daniel." I continued. "There's no need for us to talk anymore. Walk to me." I lifted my hand, and Julia walked forward to press her forehead against it. With Julia breathing softly as my skin warmed hers, I formed a new stone. It grew in the center of her mind and glowed of another color. Tears poured from Julia's eyes as she whimpered, "What is this?" I replied in her mind silently. She looked up at me as I dropped my hand and listened to the words I spoke within the walls behind her eyes. "Now I cannot lose you. Ever." As Julia realized I had made her invulnerable to harm, she smiled in a manner that seemed scared, sad, and hopeful all at once. I grabbed Julia's hand, gazed deeply into her, and guided her back to the bed to finish what we started. As Julia realized I had made her invulnerable to harm, she smiled in a manner that seemed scared, sad, and hopeful all at once. I grabbed Julia's hand, gazed deeply into her, and guided her back to the bed to finish what we started. The next morning, we disappeared together, spending most of our days in the woods, talking to each other in silence about everything we could. The majority of our conversation revolved around our love for each other. I, above all, realized love was a product of biology, a design to encourage us to reproduce, but it was something I treasured and chose not to remove from either of us. Julie would have our child one day. She insisted to me, and I felt her desire. But another desire existed. There were people around the world just like her. People, if I had met instead of her, I could have cared for in a similar way. There were innocent people. There were lost children, and I was doing nothing for any of them, despite being given all the power I could have. Society was like a book full of images, saturated with gore and chaos. I could stomach the cover, but at the moment I tried to open a single page, I felt defeated. Hopeless. Fucking true. However, I remain a teenager. While I can take actions to preserve my own existence, and that of those I love, I didn't know where to begin when it came to the order of society. I have no idea how to decide who lives and who dies when they are not an active threat to anyone. Why would you have to? And that was it. I decided that to truly justify taking human life, they had to be an active threat to another human life. I had to allow the world to continue mostly unaltered, but save enough people to make a difference overall. We were sitting outside a cabin, looking onto a massive private lake. We didn't belong there. It was not ours. But there was not much to say anything belonged to anyone. The cabin was abandoned for years. My thoughts of my place in the world plagued me, just like most any human. What's my purpose?
So, you're just gonna play hero?
Julia spoke for the first time in weeks with her own voice. I replied, "Why speak aloud?" She answered,
"It's fun, sometimes, but I don't know. It seems like no matter what you do, the world will just keep being this way. You have the ability to change it all, but you don't know if a world without darkness would really be living. So, you have a choice to either end it all, let the shadows fade, or..." I cut her off. "I can reprogram it all," she responded. "Lobotomize everyone?" I sat there silently. "No more mental illness. I'm going to cure everyone," I said. She replied, "So, no more therapy? No more medication or disorders for anyone?" I smiled and said, "I don't know of anyone who wants to be damaged." She added, "Is being damaged what makes us, us?" I was at a loss. I had a loaded gun without a trigger. After extensive thought, I decided to change the world in a way that would allow everyone to remain themselves. Only the consequences for our actions shifted. I ripped a hole in the reality standing before me. I looked into the design of it all and got to work manipulating the skeleton of our society. I strengthened potential victims of crime,
I designed defense mechanisms, enhanced aspects of the human body to strike back in a natural yet bold manner. Fingernails became strong as steel. There was no longer an imbalance between the genders. Children were given the natural inclination to know the location of their parents, and their parents had the same connection to their children, so they could never be lost or abducted effectively. I treated the world like lines of code in a video game that you know nothing about. Changing hit points, stamina, strength, I redesigned our species. I would say evolution was failing us, and I was the correction. However, I was a product of evolution. The time to return to the society I had transformed had come. Where did this fucking rock come from? I've read this whole fucking book, and this is the first I heard about a fucking rock. Fuck you. Chapter 18. Homecoming. I found myself floating. Soft clouds touched my skin, but I couldn't feel a thing. Julia said, "I'm so cold, Daniel," as she held my hand, floating thousands of feet above the ground right next to me. I replied, "How about now?" She smiled quickly. "It's gone completely." I smiled with her. I asked, "Where do you want to go?" Julie replied, "Anywhere really. We should visit my home at some point." My ability to make her comfortable, to change her physical body so she could feel whatever she wanted, to make her dreams come true. Her happiness was mine. Without hesitation, I flew us towards Julia's house. Initially, Julia's body kind of dangled behind mine, as she had no ability to keep up as I soared through the air. Flying hundreds of miles per hour was not simple, even with the ability I gave her. There were a couple points where Julia's pants fell down, but I simply fabricated new ones. At one point she said, "If you can just make them fall down with your mind, why not make pants that don't fall down when we fly?" I laughed. Julia's parents weren't too fond of me. I snatched their daughter away without notice or any hint of our destination. The unannounced return couldn't possibly be received well. Landing softly in her driveway, Julia immediately pulled her shoelace out of her shoe and tied it around her waist. I smirked and asked, "How are you going to keep your shoes on when we fly?" She replied quickly, "We're not flying." Interrupting Julia, an axe flew past my shoulder, smacking the ground a number of feet behind me. A scream sounded off from Julia's house. It was her father, with his wrinkled-up face and angry eyebrows. He yelled, "You're a dead man! Where's my daughter?" He stomped out and immediately lost his footing when Julia yelped, "Hello, Daddy!" The man tripped to his knees, right in front of me. He was incredibly choked up and ran over to her, hugging her and saying all the things dads say when magical boys fly their daughters to faraway places and without warning, and later randomly return them. Yeah, I know what her name was. After realizing his daughter was in on running away for a while, and that no one was tricked, her father, After realizing his daughter was in on running away for a while, and that no one was tricked her father into losing an unwilling daughter, he welcomed me into his house. He didn't apologize for throwing an axe at me, but you could see the apology in his forehead wrinkles when he changed his tone. Julia's mother was equally happy to see her daughter. Although, fortunately for me, she saw her daughter first before recognizing that I was in the room. I'm sure I would have been sprayed with mace, which I likely would feel for at least a second, before reprogramming that aspect of my body as well. There was cornbread cooking in the oven, a noodle dish in the rack above with salad and raspberry lemonade to help flush it all down. At dinner, Julia's father had a lot to say about the changes I made in the world, not knowing I played any part in it. He spouted out, "So, women have teeth in their crotches now, eh, Daniel?" In the middle of drinking my lemonade, I tried to swallow without a hiccup. Clearing my throat, I replied, "Yes, I thought that would make sense." Her dad looked concerned. "What do you mean?" I replied sincerely. "I mean, men have their swords. Women should have their blades too, right?" My dick isn't a sword. Julia's father gave me a sarcastic look. "Oh, you're one of those!" I giggled quickly and said, "One of," and quickly went silent mid-sentence. In that moment, I saw into his mind. Without even inquiring, I saw all the women he hurt. He had even attacked Julia's friends when she was younger. He was a serial predator, and at the moment I realized what he was, he dropped dead, face falling flat in his noodles. As Julia's mother screamed in horror, I sat there, frozen, angry with myself, angry with society, angry to the world that was still broken. I changed the future, but the people from the past, they all remained regardless of the things they had done. Snapping out of my thoughts, I saw Julia staring at me, tears running down her face, eyes turning red with a mixture of sadness and anger. She saw everything about her father I had just seen. She invaded my mind as soon as she realized I was not reacting to her father's death whatsoever. She projected her thoughts into my head seconds after I made eye contact with her. Julia did not want me there. She understood why I did what I did, but she also just lost her father and couldn't process everything with me around. Upon realizing I was not welcome, using the black rock in my skull, I materialized a dark coffin. One any family would be proud of. Well, fucking thank you. Seconds passed, and the coffin was complete, so I dropped it in the middle of their front room. Inside the coffin, I left enough money to more than compensate the household for the loss of its primary breadwinner. Motherfucker. Her mother screamed again, only this time with a coherent command. "Call an ambulance! God! I can't find my phone! Call now!" And I replied, "They're on their way." However, I did not use a phone. I simply sent a signal to the brains of the closest medics. But I knew it would not help. I was simply doing it for the mother. She did not need to know the truth about any of this. Such information could cause a person who dedicated their whole life to a fraud to fall into a deep depression. What? I simply sent a signal to the brains of the closest medics, but I knew it would not help. I was simply doing it for the mother. She did not need to know the truth about any of this. Such information could cause a person who dedicated their whole life to a fraud to fall into a deep depression, possibly leading them to taking their own life. It was tragic enough already that even his daughter had to know the truth about her father. Walking out the front door, I spoke to Julia's mind. "I'm sorry. I'll return when you call for me." But when my words hit her mind, it was like a car falling in water. First an impact, apparent rejection, followed by a slow sinking and the absorption of everything that made contact. Overwhelmed with emotion, I sprinted through the trees, the bushes, even fences, breaking everything in my path. My shoes would fall apart only to be reformed again and again. I would simply design clothing for myself using the universe's code that would result in no deterioration of anything I wore despite the stress I subjected it to. But my clothes helped keep track of how much damage I would be enduring if I was something even remotely close to human anymore. The more I ran, the more I realized I didn't know where I even wanted to go. All I could think about was Julia, back at her house with her mother, locked in sorrow. Without thinking about it, I stopped mid-step, landing in the middle of a lake. I sank, so distracted in my thoughts that I didn't even bother to fight it. I couldn't see anything. Underwater. I didn't like that feeling, so I made it clear and pure. I could see for hundreds of feet now. So many things cast aside, boats, and endless trash. Thinking about Julia, in the cold depths of the water I felt warmth. I was becoming hopeless, and I knew I could change that in an instant, but to do so would be to lose meaning, to become someone who truly has nothing to lose, and no one to love. Hours passed as I thought about where I should go, what the point would be, what the point would even be of me going anywhere, and I decided I wanted to return to the life I knew. My curiosity and sense of obligation to my family, to be my only remaining ties to my identity, I needed to return to my home. Landing in my mom's rock and dirt yard behind her condo, I walked in the sliding door. The locks opened for me without much consideration. No door was truly closed to me. "Mom! Joanna!" I yelled. Life would be easier for me if I just simply programmed them to be and when. Programmed them where to be and when. But that would take away the whole purpose of life. I didn't want to bring myself back to the abomination I found myself living in while recovering in the nurse's office. My sister yelled out, "Daniel!" and ran up to hug me. "Hey," I said as she hugged me. I added, "Mom isn't home?" And before she could answer, I already had all the info I needed. She replied, but I put my finger up to silence her. I put up my finger to silence her as I had already downloaded everything I missed. I said, "So Mom has been dating around?" "No luck yet, Joanna replied. "So you're still a freak. Cool." That night my sister and I played video games. Or at least tried. She quit Cut that out. That night my sister and I played video games. Or at least tried. She quit shortly after saying she was bored. It was typical among siblings, both wanting to hang out with the idea of their brother or sister, neither wanting to hang out with the actual person who was their brother or sister. My mom returned that night, late. She was partially drunk when she saw me, but sober enough to know who I was and that I was gone for some time. Staring at me for only a moment as she came through the door, without a word, she walked off to her room. My mom still hadn't gotten over her eyes and what I did to them. She hadn't gotten over anything I had done. I left the condo immediately after. I have always hated being where I'm unwanted. If people are better off without me, then I am better off gone. My destination was where I spent most of my childhood. The creek, the small square house, the abduction site. Landing in the middle of my old yard, I could see my mum's house. Still had not sold. It was a problem I could fix. In an instant, the documents signed themselves for the sale of the house. The money transferred itself, and just like that, it all belonged to me. Before walking into the moonlit wood home, I noticed a red glow coming from the creek. The quiet hum of death filled my ears. I could feel the other side calling me. Curiosity consumed my mind. In the morning, I would begin digging up the bodies. But tonight, I would lay on my foam mattress, next to the raging furnace, alone in my tiny room, in my tiny old house. That was chapters 15, 16, 17, and 18. Just quickly, there was like a 4-year jump in time, and all of a sudden Thanos is our main fucking character, but it's Thanos as like a fucking emo teenager. You know, stand around and be like, I have to find the Infinity Stones, you guys. Like, it's my fucking destiny. You know, that is what we're dealing with. Emo Thanos. I don't know how to put those two words together. I just tried. So, Emo Thanos is taking over the universe, and we can talk about that next time. This has been Doctorpiece Theater, and my name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my patient friends,